I bartended at this luxury hotel for almost 3 years now. This isn't just any hotel, it's where celebrities and politicians stay when they're in town. The kind of place where people come to flaunt their wealth and status. Our bar overlooks the city skyline, and a single cocktail costs what most people make in an hour. Working here has perks, great tips, interesting people, and stories I could tell for days. But it also means dealing with entitled guests who think their money buys them anything or anyone they want. My manager usually tries to keep a male bartender on shift for certain problem guests. There's this one guy, a regular, who stays with us whenever he's in town on business. He drives a McLaren, wears watches worth more than my yearly salary, and treats the female staff like we're part of the amenities. Last Thursday, I was the only bartender available for the morning shift. My two female co-workers were serving tables in the lounge area. When McLaren guy walked in, I felt my stomach drop. He had already checked out, and the valet had his car parked right outside the front entrance. A bright orange McLaren that probably cost more than my entire college education. He sat at the bar, key fob placed next to his phone, and ordered a whiskey neat. I could see him looking at my co-workers as they moved around the lounge. McLaren guy called me sweetheart and asked me to send over one of my prettier co-workers to take his order instead. I told him that I would be the one serving him today and asked what he wanted. He scowled but repeated his order for a whiskey. I brought his drink, and he started commenting on my co-worker's appearances. He pointed out the blonde server, asking if she was new and telling me to send her over to him, mentioning how generously he tips. I ignored his request and continued serving other guests. From the corner of my eye, I saw him get up and walk over to where my co-worker was arranging glasses at a side station. When she bent to place something on a lower shelf, he did it, a full undercarriage scoop, running his hand along her backside. She jumped and nearly dropped the glass she was holding. I went over and asked him to stop touching our staff, explaining that his behavior was inappropriate. His face changed. The fake charm vanished, replaced by something ugly. He demanded to know who I thought I was talking to and referenced how much money he spent at our establishment. I told him that his spending didn't give him permission to touch anyone. That's when he exploded, calling me a stupid woman and claiming he paid my salary so he could do whatever he wanted. He stood up, grabbing his whiskey glass and throwing the contents in my face. The alcohol stung my eyes, and I could feel it soaking through my uniform. He ranted about how people in the service industry were meant to serve him, and that's what we were there for. By now, other guests were staring. My co-workers had backed away, and one was on the phone to security. McLaren guy wasn't done. He pulled out a cigarette and lit it, despite our no smoking policy. When I told him that smoking wasn't allowed, he laughed and blew smoke in my face before flicking ash onto the floor. Then he walked over to one of the original paintings on the wall, artwork worth tens of thousands of dollars, and put his cigarette out on the corner of the frame. Security arrived, but they just stood there. Our general manager came up shortly after and pulled me aside. He urged me to smooth things over, emphasizing that the man was a VIP guest and we shouldn't make a scene. I protested, telling him that the guest had assaulted my co-worker and thrown a drink in my face. The GM simply asked me to handle it professionally and walked away, leaving us to deal with the situation. McLaren guy was now shouting about how we were all poor and stupid and didn't know who we were messing with. During his rage, something fell from his pocket. His key fob. It slid under a nearby chair and nobody noticed except me. I picked it up while pretending to clean up the spilled drink. The weight of it in my hand felt satisfying. For another 20 minutes, he continued his tirade, refusing to leave despite security's suggestions. Finally, he seemed to tire himself out. He announced he was done with our establishment and threatened that we would all be fired by tomorrow. He then started patting his pockets and checking the bar top. His expression changed from smug to concerned as he realized his car key was missing. Everyone started looking around. Security checked the floor. We reviewed the security cameras, but they didn't show where the key had fallen. I stayed quiet, the fob tucked in my apron pocket. After my shift ended, I walked to a public trash can 2 blocks away and dropped the fob inside, burying it under napkins and coffee cups. Later that evening, I heard from the night staff that McLaren Guy had been outside for hours trying to get into his car. The alarm kept going off every time he pulled on the handle. People from nearby businesses were coming out to see what the commotion was about. Eventually, he had to walk to a regular hotel down the street and get a room for the night. By morning, the McLaren's alarm had been going off for hours. People in the neighborhood were annoyed, and someone had thrown trash on the windshield. Others had added coffee cups and food wrappers. When the towing company came to remove the car, McLaren Guy was standing there, humiliated as passers-by took photos. He never came back to our hotel. I heard that getting a replacement key for that specific McLaren model cost him over $5,000 and required special ordering from overseas. At some points, I feel a little bad about what I did, but then I remember the look on my co-worker's face when he touched her, and how it felt having whiskey thrown in my face while being told I was worthless. I don't feel bad anymore. I work at Frosty Scoops. It's a job that helps pay my college tuition. The store has a bright beachy vibe with light blue walls and yellow accents. We sell homemade ice cream with over 30 flavors, plus milkshakes and fruit smoothies. About 5 blocks up the street is Bean and Cream, another ice cream shop that also serves coffee. They have a coffee house look with dark wood furnishings, warm lighting, and brown and cream colors. Unlike us, they offer coffee and espresso drinks, including affogatos, that Italian dessert where hot espresso gets poured over ice cream. Our shops are different and most people in town know which is which. But sometimes we get confused customers. Last Saturday, I was working the closing shift by myself. It was quiet just about an hour before closing time when a woman in her mid-40s walked in. She had an impatient look on her face as she walked up to the counter without looking at our menu board. The woman demanded an affogato from me. I told her that we don't offer any hot drinks and suggested that Bean and Cream, which does serve affogatos, was located just a few blocks up the street. She looked at me strangely. She dismissed my explanation as ridiculous and insisted that I give her an affogato. I thought maybe she hadn't heard me clearly, so I tried again. I apologized and suggested that she must have confused Frosty Scoops with Bean and Cream. Her face turned red. She denied being confused, claiming she had ordered an affogato here before and asked why I was refusing to serve her. I was getting confused. We had never served affogatos or any coffee drink in the time I'd worked there. Our store didn't even have an espresso machine. I apologized again and explained that I simply couldn't give her something we didn't have. I tried to redirect her to Bean and Cream just up the street, but she cut me off. She raised her voice and demanded to speak to my manager. I was the only employee scheduled for that night, and my manager was not going to drive over just for this. I explained that I was the only person working, but offered alternatives. She could call tomorrow morning to speak with the manager or lodge a complaint on our website. The woman's eyes widened. She looked furious. I tried one more time to explain that Bean and Cream was the place that had affogatos, but before I could finish, she spun around and stormed out the door, letting it slam behind her. I stood there for a minute. Did she think we were hiding an espresso machine somewhere? The whole encounter left me feeling like I was in some weird universe. The next morning I came in for my shift and my manager, who was counting the register, looked up at me with an amused expression. She mentioned receiving a call that morning. I knew who it was and guessed it was the affogato lady. My manager confirmed this and shared that the woman had complained about a rude girl who had refused to give her an affogato the previous night. I rolled my eyes and asked what my manager had told her. My manager said she had told the woman that the reason I refused was because we don't serve affogato and she must have confused us with Bean and Cream. When I asked how the woman had taken this explanation, my manager said she had not taken it well. The woman had yelled about being a loyal customer for years who had ordered affogatos from our shop before. She then said we had lost her business forever before hanging up. We laughed. The situation was absurd, but it also made me think about how some people can't admit when they're wrong. even when the evidence is right in front of them. A week later, I was walking home from class and decided to stop at Bean and Cream for an actual affogato. As I was waiting for my order, the woman walked in. She didn't recognize me without my Frosty Scoops uniform, but I recognized her. She went to the counter and ordered an affogato. The barista nodded and rang her up. As she waited for her order, she looked around the shop and I saw confusion cross her face as she took in the dark wood furnishings and brown color scheme. Nothing like our bright blue and yellow decor. For a moment I thought I saw realization in her eyes, but then it was gone. She accepted her affogato, took a sip, and said to nobody that it wasn't as good as it used to be. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Some people will avoid admitting they made a mistake. I enjoyed my affogato, left a tip, and walked out with a story. But I'm still baffled by that encounter. After finishing my undergraduate degree, I moved to Texas to manage a chain of Tex-Mex restaurants. The company was mostly local to the area, but they had a good reputation and were growing fast. Part of my training involved spending a month in the kitchen at one of their busier locations in Grapevine, learning their back-of-house process. I wasn't exactly a rookie when it came to restaurant work. I grew up in the business. My parents owned a small diner back home, and I'd worked all through college at a big casual dining chain. I knew how to run a kitchen, but each restaurant has its own way of doing things, so the training made sense. One morning, I woke up extra early to make the drive from Northeast Dallas to Grapevine. We had a big delivery scheduled, and as the kitchen manager in training, it was my responsibility to receive it. When the truck arrived, I greeted the driver, took my clipboard, and started supervising the unloading process. The driver worked quickly and efficiently, getting everything off the truck in about 30 minutes. Usually, after unloading, I would sign the delivery form right away so the driver could leave while I organized everything. That's how I'd always done it at previous jobs. Sign, let the driver go, then spend the next hour or so dating products, rotating stock, breaking down boxes, and putting everything away. It was just common courtesy to not make the driver wait around for all that. So I signed the form, the driver left, and I got to work organizing the delivery. Everything was going smoothly until I noticed something missing. A case of 20-count shrimp. This wasn't just a minor item. In 1995, a case of large shrimp was worth serious money, especially for a restaurant that served a lot of shrimp fajitas. No big deal, I thought. These things happen. I called the vendor to report the missing case, expecting them to either send the driver back with it, if it was still on the truck, or credit our account. That's how reasonable people do business, right? When I called the vendor, the representative told me that since I had already signed for the delivery, they couldn't help me. I tried to explain that I had only signed that the truck was unloaded, but after organizing everything, I discovered we were missing a case of 20-count shrimp. The representative was unmoved and said their policy was very clear. Once I signed the delivery form, I was confirming that everything on the invoice was received. I attempted to reason with them, pointing out that our restaurant did about $70,000 in business weekly, and we always paid our invoices on time, asking if they could make an exception. The representative refused, repeating that my signature confirmed receipt of all items listed. I asked if they were really telling me that their company wouldn't take responsibility for this mistake, even though we were a good customer. They simply repeated that it was their policy. I hung up, frustrated but already planning my next move. The following week, the same driver showed up with our delivery. Everything started normally. He began unloading, I supervised with my clipboard, and we got through the physical unloading in about half an hour. But when he handed me the delivery form to sign, I was ready. The driver indicated that everything was all set and asked for my signature so he could be on his way. I told him that I couldn't sign yet. He seemed confused and asked what I meant, pointing out that everything was already unloaded. I explained that after what happened the previous week with the missing shrimp, I needed to count everything before signing anything. The driver protested, saying that would take forever and that he had other deliveries to make. I told him I understood, but his company had made it clear that once I signed, they wouldn't take responsibility for any missing items. So I needed to verify that every single item on the invoice was actually there. The driver suggested I could just count after he left like I did before. I told him that wasn't possible anymore because of his company's policy, not mine. The driver looked at me as I started methodically going through each item, counting slowly and carefully. I took my time organizing everything, dating products, and rotating stock, all while he stood there on the loading dock getting agitated. After a while, the driver complained that this was ridiculous and mentioned he had 5 more stops that day. I simply replied that I was just following his company's policy and being thorough. I might have been a little extra thorough that day. What normally would have taken 60 to 90 minutes somehow stretched to a full 2 hours. By the time I finished and handed him the signed form, the driver was fuming. The driver angrily pointed out how late he now was, explaining that most restaurants wouldn't accept deliveries between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. during lunch rush. I apologized and suggested he mention to his management that their strict policies have results. I knew exactly what I was doing. In the restaurant business, timing is everything, and I had just thrown off this driver's entire delivery schedule. The way I saw it, if they were going to be unreasonable about a missing case of shrimp, I was going to be equally unreasonable about signing for deliveries. The next day, I got a call from the vendor's management. The vendor manager said we needed to discuss the previous day's delivery, as their driver reported that I had held him up for almost 2 hours. I confirmed this was correct and explained that after the previous week's issue was a missing shrimp that they refused to credit us for, I needed to verify every single item before signing. The manager said that this couldn't continue because they had delivery schedules to maintain. I agreed completely, saying it was inefficient for everyone. I explained that I would prefer to sign quickly and let their driver continue his route, but their company had made it clear that once I signed, any discrepancies were my problem. The manager suggested we could come to an arrangement. If I would cooperate and sign promptly after unloading, they would work with me in good faith if there were any issues with future orders. I asked about the case of shrimp we were missing from the previous week, and the manager promised they would credit our account on the next delivery. With that, I agreed we had a deal. True to their word, they credited us for the missing shrimp on our next order, and I went back to signing delivery forms promptly. Several years ago, I was living in an older neighborhood built in the 70s. We were close to downtown, a large lake, city parks, and a beach. My wife and I had moved there after our daughter was born. The place was perfect, affordable, quiet, and with plenty of outdoor spaces for when our little one would eventually learn to walk. I've been working as a police officer for about 5 years, and after saving up, we were finally able to buy our first home. There was only one problem with the neighborhood. One neighbor drove a beat-down Honda with a modified exhaust system that sounded like an angry weed eater. But that wasn't the worst part. He spent way too much money on a stereo system he loved to show off. You could hear him coming from blocks away. As he got closer, his bass would shake the walls and rattle windows. You couldn't hear your TV or have a conversation when this jerk drove by. My wife would ask if the baby was still sleeping. I'd warn that the guy was about to drive by again. Then the walls would start vibrating, my wife would express frustration, and our daughter would start wailing from her crib. He didn't care what time it was, 2 in the afternoon or 2 in the morning. His music blasted with terrible taste. What made it infuriating was him waking my baby several times every day and night. After 3 weeks of disrupted sleep and a cranky baby, my wife was at her wit's end. She told me I needed to do something about this, pointing out that I was a cop after all. I explained that I couldn't just arrest him since it wasn't my jurisdiction. She suggested I talk to him like a normal person, pleading because she hadn't slept more than 2 hours straight in weeks. One day, while driving to work, I saw him outside working on his car. I introduced myself as a neighbor, told him about the loud stereo, explained it was waking my baby, and asked him to be considerate. He showed pride in his expensive system but apologized and agreed to turn it down. Unfortunately, he didn't. The loud music continued. I spoke to some friends at the local police department and asked them to write him tickets if they caught any violations. After 2 more weeks of sleep deprivation, I was at my breaking point. I had to work 12-hour shifts, dealing with criminals then come home to a crying baby and an exhausted wife. Every time I heard that Honda approaching, my blood pressure rose. About 2 months later, two local cops knocked on my door asking if I did it. I asked what they meant, and we went back and forth before I learned they were asking about my friend with the loud music. Apparently, someone had left a note on his car asking him to turn that stuff down. The note was attached to the hood using 4 framing nails from a nail gun, leaving holes in the paint. I laughed and told them I agreed with the note but didn't do it. There was an investigation, but no leads were found. The Honda owner was claiming police harassment because he knew I was a cop. I defended myself, saying I hadn't done anything and had been working doubles all week. To those reading this, I promise, I did not nail a note to that kid's car. I would have used a screw gun with self-tapping screws. It worked though. I never heard the stereo again. A week later, I saw him driving with windows up and no sound leaking out. The Honda still sounded like a dying lawnmower, but at least it wasn't shaking our walls. My wife asked if I had something to do with what happened. I denied it but added whoever did it deserved a medal. She mentioned our baby had slept through the night 3 times in a row.